The year is 1793. France is a nation on fire. The French Revolution, ignited by ideals of liberty, equality and fraternity, has descended into a maelstrom of chaos and bloodshed. The streets of Paris, once vibrant with the promise of a new era, now echo with the screams of the accused and the thud of the guillotine. The revolution has devoured its children. The once powerful French monarchy, weakened by years of extravagance and indifference to the plight of its people, has been overthrown. King Louis XVI, stripped of his authority and labelled a traitor to the revolution, awaits his fate in a cold, damp prison cell. France, once the envy of Europe, is now a pariah, its revolutionary zeal viewed with suspicion and fear by its neighbours. Across the countryside, whispers of dissent against the radical Jacobins who have seized control of the revolution are growing louder. The execution of the king, a move many see as a step too far, has ignited the flames of rebellion. In the south, the city of Toulon, a vital port on the Mediterranean coast, becomes a focal point of resistance against the revolutionary government in Paris. The year 1793 marked a turning point in the French Revolution, a descent into a period known as the Reign of Terror. This era was characterized by extreme political upheaval, widespread fear, and the ruthless elimination of perceived enemies of the revolution. At the heart of this tumultuous period was the execution of King Louis XVI. His death symbolized the end of an era and the irreversible shift in the French political landscape. Once considered a symbol of divine right, Louis XVI found himself increasingly at odds with the revolutionary fervor sweeping the nation. The king, who once held absolute power, was now a figure of scorn and derision. His attempts to appease the revolutionaries backfired, as his efforts were seen as too little, too late. The king's hesitant reforms were perceived as weakness rather than genuine concession, further alienating him from the people. His hesitant reforms seen as weakness rather than concession. The revolutionary pamphlets and public discourse painted him as indecisive and out of touch with the needs of the nation. The storming of the Bastille in 1789 and the subsequent abolition of feudalism had irrevocably shifted the balance of power in France. These events ignited the revolutionary spirit and set the stage for the dramatic changes that followed. The monarchy, once absolute, was now held hostage by the will of the people. The royal family found themselves prisoners in their own country, their every move scrutinized and controlled by the revolutionaries. Louis XVI's fate was sealed with the discovery of his secret correspondence with Austria, revealing his attempts to solicit foreign aid to quell the revolution. This act of desperation was seen as the ultimate betrayal. Revealing his attempts to solicit foreign aid to quell the revolution. The king's clandestine efforts to undermine the revolution only served to hasten his downfall. He was branded a traitor, a symbol of the old order that the revolution sought to overthrow. The revolutionary tribunal showed no mercy and the king's fate was sealed, a symbol of the old order that the revolution sought to overthrow. The destruction of symbols of the old regime and the rise of revolutionary propaganda underscored the dramatic shift in power. On a cold January day in 1793, Louis XVI was led to the Place de la Révolution, the shadow of the guillotine looming large. The king's final moments were marked by a somber march to the execution site, the shadow of the guillotine looming large. The instrument of his death stood as a stark reminder of the revolution's unforgiving nature. The crowds, once devoted subjects, watched in stunned silence as the King of France was beheaded. The execution was a public spectacle, a grim testament to the revolution's resolve. The execution sent shockwaves throughout Europe. Monarchies across the continent were shaken, and the news of the king's death spread rapidly, causing widespread fear and uncertainty. It was a stark demonstration of the revolution's uncompromising nature, a clear message that no one, not even the king, was above the revolutionary law, a signal that the old world was crumbling and the established order was being dismantled piece by piece, and a new, uncertain era had begun. The execution of Louis XVI marked the dawn of a new age, filled with both hope and trepidation, as France embarked on its journey towards a republic. The execution of Louis XVI was not merely a domestic affair, it sent shockwaves across Europe, pushing the continent to the brink of war. Monarchs across Europe fearing the spread of revolutionary ideals to their own lands, saw the French Revolution as a dangerous contagion. The execution of a fellow sovereign was an act they could not ignore. Austria and Prussia, long-standing rivals of France, were among the first to declare war. They aimed to crush the revolution, restore the monarchy, and reassert the old order. The French Republic, though internally divided, rose to the challenge, fueled by a fierce sense of patriotism and a determination to defend the revolution's hard-won gains. What began as a conflict between France and its immediate neighbors quickly escalated into a continent-wide war. Great Britain, Spain, the Netherlands, and other European powers joined the coalition against France. The French Revolution, initially a struggle for internal change, had transformed into a fight for national survival against a coalition of hostile powers. The fate of France, and indeed of Europe, hung in the balance. Section 4. Uprising, Counter-Revolution Within. The war against foreign powers was only half the battle for the fledgling French Republic. While the external threats were formidable, the internal conflicts proved to be equally, if not more, challenging. The revolution had ignited a fervor that spread across the nation, but it also sowed seeds of discord and division. Internally, the nation was tearing itself apart. The ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity were overshadowed by the harsh realities of political and social upheaval. The streets of Paris and other cities were filled with unrest, as different factions vied for power and control. The execution of Louis XVI, while celebrated by some, had deepened the divisions within France. The act of regicide was a turning point, symbolizing the irreversible break from the old regime. However, it also alienated many who had been sympathetic to the revolutionary cause but were horrified by the king's death. Royalists, horrified by the regicide, took up arms against the revolutionary government. They saw the execution as a betrayal of the nation's heritage and a descent into barbarism. These royalist forces were determined to restore the monarchy and reverse the changes brought about by the revolution. Regions with strong royalist sympathies, particularly in the Vendée and the south, became hotbeds of counter-revolutionary activity. These areas, with their deep-rooted traditions and conservative values, resisted the radical changes imposed by the revolutionary government. The Vendée, a largely rural region in western France, witnessed a particularly brutal uprising. The local population, feeling marginalized and oppressed by the new regime, rose in rebellion. The conflict in the Vendée was marked by intense violence and atrocities committed by both sides. Fueled by religious and political grievances, the Vendéan rebellion posed a serious threat to the revolutionary government. The suppression of the Catholic Church and the imposition of revolutionary ideals clashed with the deeply held beliefs of the rural populace. Peasants, outraged by the execution of their king and the persecution of the Catholic Church, formed a formidable fighting force. These ordinary men and women, driven by a sense of injustice and a desire to protect their way of life, took up arms and fought with remarkable tenacity. The counter-revolutionaries, often led by former noblemen and priests, exploited the chaos and instability of the time to challenge the authority of Paris. They rallied support from those disillusioned with the revolution, promising a return to order and tradition. The French Republic faced a war on two fronts: a foreign war against a coalition of European powers and a civil war against its own citizens. The strain of fighting both external and internal enemies stretched the resources and resolve of the revolutionary government to the limit. The survival of the revolution, once seemingly assured, was now in jeopardy. Revolutionary leaders were forced to confront the harsh reality that their vision of a new France was under threat from within and without. The stakes had never been higher. It was in this context of internal strife and external threat that a young artillery officer named Napoleon Bonaparte would first make his mark on history. His rise to prominence would be fueled by the very chaos that threatened to engulf the revolution, setting the stage for a new chapter in France's tumultuous history. Section 5. Toulon, a strategic prize in British intervention. On the sun-drenched shores of the Mediterranean lay Toulon, a city of immense strategic importance. Its picturesque beauty belied the critical role it played in the geopolitical landscape of the time. As one of France's largest and best-equipped naval bases, Toulon held the key to controlling the Mediterranean Sea. The port was a hub of naval activity, with ships constantly coming and going, and its fortifications were among the strongest in Europe. In the summer of 1793, this vital port became a focal point in the struggle for the soul of France. The air was thick with tension as the revolutionary fervor that had swept through Paris began to ripple outwards, reaching even the farthest corners of the nation. Discontent with the increasingly radical policies of the revolutionary government in Paris, Toulon's citizens rose up in rebellion. The streets were filled with the cries of those who felt betrayed by the revolution they had once supported. They sought to restore the monarchy and end the bloodshed that had gripped the nation. Royalist symbols and slogans became a common sight as the people of Toulon yearned for a return to stability and order. Desperate for support, the rebels looked to Great Britain, France's long-standing enemy, for assistance. The British, who had been watching the turmoil in France with keen interest, saw an opportunity to weaken their rival. The British, eager to exploit France's internal turmoil, were quick to seize the opportunity. They saw Toulon as a strategic prize that could shift the balance of power in the Mediterranean. A British fleet, under the command of Admiral Samuel Hood, sailed into Toulon's harbour, welcomed as liberators by the rebellious citizens. The arrival of the British was seen as a beacon of hope by those who opposed the revolutionary government. The British occupation of Toulon was a major blow to the French Republic. French soldiers and officials were thrown into disarray, scrambling to respond to this unexpected turn of events. It not only gave Britain a strategic foothold on the French coast, but also threatened to cut off vital supply lines and further embolden the counter-revolution. The British quickly set about fortifying their position, knowing that holding Toulon could be a game-changer in the conflict. The fall of Toulon, if not quickly reversed, could have had disastrous consequences for the revolution. Revolutionary leaders knew that they had to act swiftly to reclaim the port and prevent the British from gaining a permanent stronghold in France.